All right, so let's get to lab 2. So click back into here. So when we go back into here, if you're looking at the slide deck, it will tell you that the actual lab 2 is facts. So that's the one that I'm going into at the moment. It's called the Network Automation Basic Facts. So when you click into yours, it's going to take about 30 seconds or so to kick it off. Make sure it says Network Facts. And just like before, there's different, browser tabs and things that you'll see once you go into the lab. So this one here is starting with just a terminal. So we'll see what changes on the next screen. I think we do get a VS Code terminal as we get a little bit further into it. All right, so this one, it wants us to type Ansible Navigator here, and that will bring up the TUI. So if you just type that much of Ansible Navigator without run, it's just going to default to the to that text menu. Get this out of the way. So here's like the default options that are in the menu. So one of the things that it wants to show us is perhaps we want to look at the documentation. If you just Google Ansible and whatever the name of the module is, it'll take you right to the documentation online. But if for some reason you're offline and you have your navigator, you can look at the local documentation. So the way that we interact with this TUI menu is that we can type any of the names of whatever, depending on which layer we are in this menu, we can just type colon in the name of what we want to do. So documents is on the main page. So, I need to get my terminal at the bottom too, so I can see what's up. Well, I guess I can't get a terminal on this one. So the way to do it is blah, blah, blah. Where am I typing at? Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Let me escape. All right, so I'm in a terminal. Maybe I just couldn't see it on my screen because I've got this thing from the Google Meets in the way. Let me make that smaller. It'll let me make it smaller. I'll just hide it over here. Not that big. All right, well, excuse me while I try to get my screen a little bit better. I'm just going to exit out of it right now. Ansible Navigator. Maybe at the very bottom, I need to scroll up. Oh, okay, I can see it now. It's at the very, very bottom. All right, so go :doc, and then the name of the plugin. Right, so the plugin could be like a module or like a filter plugin, something along those lines. So we want to look at debug. Debug is how you can show on the screen an output from a playbook. So if you do :doc space debug and hit enter, then this is the documentation. And like any Ansible documentation, it's going to show you like all the parameters that you can set. There's check mode right there, by the way. It'll show you all the parameters. And then as you scroll down, it'll show you examples of using that module in a playbook task. So right under examples. So normally I'll look at whatever parameter I'm trying to deal with and then try to find it in the examples to get some idea of how to use it in the playbook. And then once you want to escape out of here, you can just hit escape and you go back to the main menu. And if you hit escape again, you go back to the terminal. So another thing that it's pointing out is you really should use like the fully qualified collection name, where we just did debug, but debug, it can always find it because if you did the fully qualified name, its name is ansible.built-in.debug. So the built-in are all the built-in collections that when you install Ansible, they're already there. But when we start to use vendor collections, right, then we have to call them specifically, and they may not be installed. If Ansible can't find them, you'll get an error message back. But even for Ansible to find them in the collections that you've installed, it's recommended to do that complete namespace. So if we want to look at the Cisco ILS specs, it's kind of like the same thing that we did. We can go back into Ansible Navigator and then do the :doc. But this time we're going to spell out the entire namespace. So Cisco is the vendor. It's ILSXE, so it's just ILS, and then facts. Or it could be ILS_facts. So you can do it this way, or you can do it like this and hit enter. And then it'll bring up the documentation for gathering facts from an iOS device. So there's a lot of different parameters. And then we get into the examples down here. So just to kind of explain how facts works, if you do gather subset all, that'll bring in all the facts from that particular iOS device. If you just call the module, like say all you included was Cisco ILS.ILS_facts, it's just going to do the default level, which is like the equivalent of show var. Gather subsets, the equivalent of show var, plus your running config, plus like show interfaces, like that type of thing. Or you can just call out one. So config, so this one right here, gather subset config, would be the same thing as like the running config. If you just wanted to see the hardware information, then you can include just hardware, but you can see here, they've added an exclamation point, which means don't bring that one down. So this would bring everything down, but just the hardware information. So that's like the exclamation point would be, or bang would just be like negate or not. You can gather like all, subset all, but then there's also additional facts that we can pull in from the resource module. So if you remember earlier, we were talking about VLANs. So if I did gather network resources instead of all and did VLANs, it would gather just the VLAN config. So in this case, they're gathering just the interfaces, which would be like the physical interfaces. There's also layer 2 interfaces, and there's layer 3 interfaces. So you could list out like a bunch of them, or just call one in particular. But there's like the generic or global facts, and then there's the resource module facts. But between all of these, you can get like a lot of very robust information of the existing configuration state of a device and have access to all that configuration, and it comes in as structured data. So you can save it as like a YAML file with just key value pairs, or a dictionary, as they call it. So we won't get too deep into that, but dictionaries is really more around the programmability and how you organize all these elements. But that's something that you'll use over and over again as you start to work more with your playbooks and configurations. So what are they doing? So we looked at that part, and then it's a check again. So now we're going to go into a playbook. So we have our VS Code. I knew it was in here somewhere. So we've got our VS Code, and we got our terminal so we can communicate with the router. So in VS Code, we know we might as well make a terminal, new terminal. And then here we've got the files that they're talking about. So they want us to make a playbook that's called facts.yaml. So we can do that in a couple different ways. You can touch the file to create it down here, or you can go into VS Code and click on File, New File, and then we want to name it what they're talking about, which is just fax.yaml. Actually, that's not where I want to be. Be like up here, untitled. Get out of here. File, new file. I guess I'd save it after I make it, I guess. Let me just copy this so I don't have to type all that. Paste. File, save as. Fax.yaml. Right, so it shows up down here. All right, and all we have is this part so far. So what we're doing here is we're connecting to a group called Cisco, and then gather fax is no, because when you do this gather fax, it's only going to just gather like the show ver part of it, but we want to do different things. So we're going to turn it off at this level, and we're going to turn it on in the actual module. So that's where step 2 is going to take us. So here's the module. So this was the play. And then we'll hopefully this paste in okay. Yeah, it's not. I need to get the task over a little bit. So tasks should be at the same level as the rest of the play. And then we can move this back like this. And then this is just the name of the module. Well, kind of the default of this is like, this is going to give us kind of the same level that we would have had here anyway. But if you don't put anything under here, the default is just the default level of fax from the iOS device, which is like show ver level. So this is here. I think it automatically saved it, but I'm going to do Control S anyway. And then they want us to execute the playbook. So when I run this playbook, it's really not going to show me a whole lot on the screen. So there's two different things that I can do as a next step. I can use the debug parameter to print out this output on screen, or I can run this in like one level of verbosity and we can see what those facts are. So here they just have us just running it, and you'll see we're not going to see a whole lot running it this way. So we need to run that down here in the terminal. And we're not doing the mode standard output. So this is going to be in the TUI. So it's running, in here, and we'll see everything in the menu. All right, so it finished. So if I go ahead and click 0 into this, right, I go into the playbook, and then we can see the output. So let me, at this point, make this a little bit bigger. So this is like the, we call these the magic names. These are the built-in variables and how they're named for the fax. So these iOS fax come back as part of Ansible fax. And then these are like the default naming. So it's bringing in like the existing IP addresses here. And then here's like your show ver types of things are a part of this too, like file system stuff. And you can see like the image that's installed, the host name, right? So this is just all of the information that just comes back as part of the default. And the reason why we can see it is because when you run the playbook in the TUI, by default, it creates that artifact that we can view, right? So we can see the output. But if we ran that as just standard output, we really wouldn't have had this level without turning on the verbosity. So to get out of here, hit escape a couple times, go back to terminal. and this won't take but a second. So -m std out, and you'll see we won't really see too much here, right? It just shows that it ran the facts, but there's really not any view of what it was. And if we want to see the output, then do -v. And then you can see all that output, but it's like a blob of JSON output, where the TUI kind of packages it in a more human readable way because it's YAML. So what it's going to ask us to do is let's manipulate what the output looks like on the screen using the debug. So that's what they're doing here, is we just want to see the iOS version and the serial number. And then that's pretty straightforward using debug. All right, so we're just going to add another task into our play, or a couple of tasks, because we want to see two different things. Maybe make this smaller now. Where does it start? Here, that. Give us a little more space up here. And then pray that when you paste, it goes in easily without having to change it too much. Mine's all messed up. So just move things back with the proper indentations. Debug. Okay, so these should be okay. And then you can see here, these double curly braces are how we create placeholders for variables. So we don't define these variables because they've already been defined for us in that module that gathered the facts. So these are just the names for them. So Ansible_net version and Ansible_net serial number. We should see that in the output. We should be able to read this text message, and then it'll populate those for us. So this is just the typical Jinja 2 formatting for variables that we can use in our playbooks. So I'm going to do Control S to save just in case. And then running the playbook, how are they running it? Are they running it in the TUI? Okay. But either way, oh, actually not in the TUI. It's mode standard out. But we'll see it this time because we're using the debug module. So let's scroll back. Hard time finding where this. I want to get my terminal. There it is. Move that up. So here's what we wanted to see on the screen. We can see the iOS version and the serial number. So the two variable placeholders were populated from the facts information that we gathered in this task. So that's one cool thing about gathering facts, is like once you have them in memory, you can use them in any of the tasks in your play. You can also create and set facts from other output. You can create your own facts, if you will, by setting facts. And you can register any of the output from a task and then use that in subsequent tasks to populate variables as well. Or you can define your variables in files somewhere. So there's like 20 different locations where you can locate variables for Ansible, but the main ones are typically like in your inventory or in group vars or host vars in a directory that's named that, with the actual names of the devices as they're named in your inventory. Ansible can find them automatically that way. Or you can include vars and vars files in your playbook and point to them at the play level or at the test level. And then there's other options too. And extra variables is a way that you can override, because they have the highest precedence, any of the variables that you have. But that's not really like a beginner level. There's a lot of nuances there in variables, but just note that you can define them in many different ways. And they have an order that they're found by Ansible, and they also have a precedence where one variable may override another depending on where it's located. I think